Welcome to Lifestyle by SK, where wine, cigars, and relationships create that tapestry of extraordinary experience. Of course, this one is going to be a really good episode today. I think y'all are really going to like it. Got some really good points that need to be addressed. So we can go ahead and get those knocked out and in the mix. But I want to talk a little bit today about the quiet and loneliness of men. And men don't necessarily talk about this a lot, at least to each other, but it's something that's more of what the public would see and looking in here. Now, a man could be surrounded by a lot of people and still feel lonely. And some of you wonder, well, how is that the case? Well, let me go ahead and just try to break that down for you. Men have fewer friendships a lot of times, less emotional support, and no real space for them to be able to open up to discuss and talk about their thoughts. And that loneliness is killing them silently. And why men become so isolated in the mix of this is it develops in an early stage of life. Think about it. Think about when you was a young boy coming up to your childhood and you fell, you wasn't bleeding, and they would say, "Don't cry," right? And then you grow into your teenage years, and what you will hear a lot of times in the adolescence is "man up." Have you ever heard a man saying that to a young boy? So now this is all beginning to come back to your brain because you didn't realize how programmed you were with certain things coming up. And then by the time you reach adulthood, you just got to get out there and figure it out. This world, the weather, and time is going to whoop you up in so many different ways. And your problems are yours alone. And so men grow up learning to suffer a lot of times in silence because there is no outlet for them to be able to suffer and talk to someone in. And that is some different points of what we're missing here. And we have to definitely be transparent with that, people. And in this modern day in society, with the loneliness being a problem with the men, is a lot of times there are fewer close male friends that are around them. And when you don't have that emotional outlet, you replace the brotherhood with their phone screens. Like, literally think about that. If you're lonely, because a lot of you do it sitting at a restaurant and coffee shops, when you're bored and you're there by yourself and you're lonely, you pick up your phone and start scrolling. And I'm willing to bet if you look at the number of hours that man probably scrolls on his phone, you're gonna see a lot of hours on some kind of social media platform. But those work plus those bills plus that stress is going to equate at some point to isolation. You're gonna slowly see yourself fading into the abyss, into something completely different. In marriage or relationships, those can't fix loneliness at all because you can be still married, fellas, and still experience that loneliness because you don't have a person that's going to support you. And then when you don't have a person support you, you have no foundation beneath any of that. And being needed is not the same as being supported. Now, when you look at the emotional and mental capacity and the impact that they have on men, because remember, men are taught they're not supposed to feel anything. But the reality is, when you're thinking about it, there's going to be a revelation of consequences that show up from depression. It's going to be emotional uh, a numbness there. You're definitely going to have a problem with that. Anger and a lack of purpose. But that loneliness doesn't always hurt and just hurt that man emotionally, but it rewires him to think different. Even if you listen to the previous episode, I talked about the difference between working a dead end job and having a purpose. And this is all wrapping it into one piece here. But we most definitely need to to tap into this, fellas, a little bit different, because the reality, if we stop going back and forth with the women out here and stop blaming the women for this and that, and we going back and forth on these podcasts, fussing each other out, talking crazy to each other, if the men can laser focus their targets on the young men and the boys and the grown adult men out here, if we can get them right and we all can get on code and be able to check each other when we're doing something out of line, we need to have a strategic plan. We need a rock for the quarter. For the next 3 months, you need something that you can focus on that's going to guide you right. Because think about it, when you are right yourself and you set that foundation, when you grow up to have children, especially if you have boys, you're able to properly guide them in ways that modern society is not able to do that. Because in modern society, the goal is to separate the man, the woman, and the child. And it's going to be the woman and the child separated from the man. But if you bring that man back into the picture and recreate that nuclear family that is there, you talking about some rewiring. That rewiring is going to be one tough thing. Now, some of you may ask, why don't men reach out for help? Why don't men reach out for assistance? Well, let's talk about that. A lot of times they'll be ashamed to look weak to other men that's out there. They may get laughed at, don't want to burden other people, feeling like they're going to be judged by every man that's out there on the block, because men believe nobody will understand. And most men, or let me ask you this, would most of you agree that most men are lonely? Definitely put that in the comments below. I wanted to definitely hear from you all about this. Ladies, if you got a perspective on this, please spit it out in the comments below. But it's not necessarily because they don't want the connection, but because they don't feel that they need to or allow to seek it out. And how we can rebuild that connection, I did go over a piece of that a second ago, but let's break down some of the real solutions that could be some potential aspects of that. Is when you have intentional friendships that you're going to rebuild, that's going to bring value and pour value back into your life. That is one part. What about joining any kind of environments where men gather? For example, I walked into a cigar shop one day, and there was a group of men from different backgrounds, predominantly black and white, that was sitting there, and they had a common thing. They were enjoying a cigar, they had wings and pizza, they had music and stuff, and they were just talking. Then the other day they were sitting around a campfire outside, and the men were talking. And when I asked what was going on, they said they had a monthly meetup where they do something different, whether they do like a Bible study or they're doing something different to get the men together to come out there and actually talk to one another. And that is a good thing. But we have to be honest with ourselves, men. We have to create accountability. We have to create accountability circles. See, the thing that we are missing in society, and I'm gonna step off from the men here for a second. You will hear a lot in social media that the men can't hold the women accountable, particularly black women. But here I am right now saying, fellas, we need to be able to hold each other accountable. So if I'm saying it about the fellas, what we would hope to hear and what we hope that the women are discussing on their podcasts and channels is the women are finding ways to specifically and only hold the women accountable without mentioning the men. If we can get to that, people, we can do some rebuilding here. You talking about rebuilding families, nuclear families? We are in for a treat around here. But we stop bonding only through distractions like gaming, drinking, and sports because their brotherhood is not an optional thing at this time, but it is that the oxygen that's going to be pressed into the circles of the men that's out there. But I want to make sure that we get this: a man that stands alone can survive, but a man with a brotherhood of other like minded, strong men out there can grow into something, and you do not have to suffer in silence me any longer, because you deserve connection that supports you and supports a real community of real men. So until the next time, most definitely like, listen, subscribe to the channel. Lifestyle by SK, where wine, cigars, and relationships create that table shift extraordinary experience. You all have a good one.